It was a Thursday when things shifted, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. I'd left work early for the first time in weeks. There wasn't any grand reason, just a canceled meeting and a feeling I couldn't quite place, like something was tugging at me from home. I remember the drive back clearly. Late autumn sunlight poured through the windshield, trees along the highway already half bare. Lauren had sent me a text that morning, saying she had a client meeting in the afternoon. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just another Thursday. The house was still when I pulled up. Too still. We live in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighborhood where everyone keeps their lawn edges clean and waves whether they like you or not. Our home sat right at the curve, 2 stories with light gray siding, navy shutters, and a porch swing Lauren picked out during our 3rd year of marriage. She had a thing for catalog-style comfort. Everything staged just right, from the wreath on the door to the matching welcome mat that said, "Come in, we're awesome." But when I stepped inside that evening, nothing felt awesome. Something was off before I even saw anything. Murphy, our golden retriever, didn't come running to the door like usual. That dog has a radar for my arrival, no matter the time. Instead, he was curled up at the far end of the hallway, his ears perked up but his head resting flat against his paws like he knew better than to move. That wasn't normal. "Hey, bud," I said, crouching briefly to scratch behind his ears. He blinked up at me but didn't wag his tail. I should have taken that as my first clue. In the kitchen, 2 wine glasses sat on the marble-topped island, one empty, one half full. The bottle next to them was an expensive red we'd been saving for a special night. The kind we usually uncork to celebrate birthdays or anniversaries. Not Thursdays. Not client meetings. One of the glasses was still warm. I picked it up and ran my finger along the side. It hadn't been sitting long. That's when I saw the sport coat, draped casually over the back of one of the chairs. Charcoal gray with a faint herringbone pattern. Nice. Definitely not mine. I touched it, still slightly damp from the cold, maybe even sweat along the collar. I lifted it to my face out of reflex and caught the scent. Cologne. Not just unfamiliar, but bold. The kind of fragrance meant to announce a presence. Expensive. Masculine. Definitely not anything I owned, and certainly not something Lauren ever complimented on me. I stood there a moment, holding it, heart knocking against my ribs as the pieces started to arrange themselves in a quiet line of implication. There was a quick string of rational thoughts. Maybe it was a client. Maybe someone had left it by mistake. But that didn't explain why one glass was still warm, or why the scent was so strong in the air. Clung like smoke. I didn't call out for Lauren. Instead, I walked down the hall to the bathroom, unsure what I even expected to find. Hanging on the towel rack was a forest green towel larger than our usual ones. Drenched. Its ends were still dripping faintly into the hamper below, and it carried that same cologne. Stronger this time. The steam hadn't fully cleared from the mirror, and the sink still had faint droplets along the edge like someone had just rinsed their face, or washed up in a hurry. My hand gripped the doorframe harder than I meant to. It was subtle, but it wasn't nothing. This wasn't a wine and documents meeting. This wasn't how Lauren normally operated. She was calculated, organized, and, above all, tidy. She didn't leave towels lying around soaked like that. And wine? She didn't crack open $100 bottles for casual real estate discussions. Not when we were already arguing about our budget. Then I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. Her voice followed a few seconds later. "Andrew?" she called out. A soft click as the deadbolt turned. "You're home." I stepped out of the bathroom, meeting her just as she came in, still halfway through removing her scarf. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. She had her work tote slung over one shoulder, heels in one hand, and a slight sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the cool air outside. "You're home early," she said, forcing a smile as she toed off her shoes. "I thought you had that quarterly meeting tonight. Got canceled." I nodded toward the kitchen without saying more. "Client leave his coat behind?" She glanced in the direction I gestured, and for half a second, just half, her face flickered. Not panic. Just a brief recalibration like she was adjusting her script. "Oh, that?" she said with a soft laugh. "Yeah." That's Greg's. He's a new investor, some tech guy. Big money, wants to get into real estate. He dropped by to go over the Oak Ridge property. Over wine? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Just a glass, she said smoothly. To help with negotiations. You know how uptight these types can be. He wasn't opening up until I made things less formal. Just trying to close the deal, babe. I didn't respond, just kept looking at her. She stepped past me, dropping her heels by the door and walking barefoot into the kitchen like everything was fine. She rinsed the glasses as she continued. I didn't even know you'd be home so early. Otherwise, I'd have waited for you. He left maybe 10 minutes ago. I stayed by the hallway watching her body language. She moved confidently, casually, but her hands rinsed the glasses a little too fast, like she was trying to erase fingerprints. Then she turned and shifted the subject so fast it almost gave me whiplash. But you know what's really weird? She said, leaning against the counter. You coming home early. That's not like you at all lately. I mean, you've been gone late almost every night for, 2 months? She tilted her head slightly, smile fading into concern. Are you okay? Like really? Because this whole overtime grind. It's been a lot. On us. That's when I knew I was being redirected. She wasn't just explaining. She was defending. She had her counter ready. Turn it into a you problem. Make it about the hours, the stress, my absence. She walked over and touched my arm gently, like it would ground me. We should probably talk about that soon, she said, her voice low and sincere. I know you've been pushing yourself, but I've been feeling a little disconnected, like we're not even crossing paths anymore. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up into her eyes. You feel disconnected? I asked, keeping my tone even. She didn't answer right away, just nodded, biting her lip like it hurt to say it. I didn't press further. I didn't ask about the towel, or why she hadn't mentioned the meeting when I texted earlier. I didn't ask why the wine bottle was one of our good ones, or how come this Greg had left without so much as a business card or folder in sight. Instead, I let it all sit, quietly, suspended between us like a fragile wire. Murphy walked into the room, tail tucked low, and Lauren bent down to scratch behind his ears like nothing was wrong. I'm gonna order Thai for dinner, she said cheerfully. That sound good? I nodded once. Sure. She smiled and turned toward the kitchen drawer for the takeout menus. And all I could think, watching her move around the room like nothing had happened, was how well-practiced she was. Like this wasn't the first time. That night, long after Lauren had fallen asleep beside me, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body still, but my mind pacing the hallways of the past few months. I kept circling back to the towel, the jacket, the wine, the perfect timing of her story. The way she steered the conversation toward my late work hours like it was all some kind of relationship negotiation tactic. Like I was the one who had left a stranger's jacket in our kitchen. But it wasn't just tonight. That was the worst part. The truth was, I'd been seeing signs for a while. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Now, in the dark, I started stringing them together, one after another, like lights flickering on across a map I didn't want to read. Started small. Lauren began staying late in the city more often. Client dinners, she said. Back-to-back showings. That sort of thing. First, I believed her. She's a real estate agent, after all, and her business had picked up since the summer. But there were nights when she wouldn't get home until 10:30, sometimes later. She'd walk in tired, talking fast, like she had to catch me up on the script before I had time to ask questions. One night, I came home and found a Nordstrom bag tucked under the bed. Inside was a dress I'd never seen before. Sleek, form-fitting, with a slit that ran dangerously high up one leg. I pulled it out, checked the receipt. Bought in Raleigh, not our town. Not even our county. She'd never worn it around me. I asked her about it later and she shrugged it off. Said she bought it on a whim, hadn't decided if she liked it. But I checked the tags a few days later, they were gone. Then there was her purse. She used to keep her makeup bag simple, compact powder, lip gloss, maybe a tiny perfume bottle. But lately, she carried a larger tote, and inside I found items I hadn't seen before. Designer cosmetics she never bought locally. A hairbrush I didn't recognize. A different brand of concealer. At first, I thought maybe she was just upgrading her style, treating herself. But then I noticed how carefully she arranged it, how she'd keep it zipped and tucked away like it held something secret. And the phone. That was the big one. Lauren used to be careless with it. She'd leave it charging in the kitchen overnight, face up, notifications lighting the screen with group texts and Instagram tags. But not anymore. These days, it never left her side. It was always face down. She even started taking it into the bathroom, which she'd never done before. One evening, I walked past the door and heard her speaking in a low voice, just above a whisper. Soft, laughing quietly in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, listening like a stranger outside someone else's life. When she came out, I asked her who she'd been talking to. She blinked, then smiled. A client, she said casually. He's a first-time buyer and panics over every step. Kind of sweet, actually. Sweet. That word lodged somewhere in my chest. I let it go. Told myself she was being kind, professional. Told myself I was imagining things. That was becoming a pattern with me. Brushing things off. Burying my gut instincts beneath a mountain of benefit of the doubt. And then there were the sunglasses. A few weeks back, I borrowed Lauren's car to run a quick errand. She was using my truck for a showing that required a bit of hauling, so I hopped into her SUV without a second thought. The drive was uneventful until I reached the gas station. I dropped my phone between the seats and, when I reached down to grab it, my hand brushed against something hard. I pulled it out, men's sunglasses. Sleek, modern, black-framed, with gold trim. Not mine. Not the cheap kind either. I took them inside and asked her about them when I got back. She barely glanced at them. Oh, she said. Probably from one of my clients. Sometimes I offer rides to showings, and people leave things behind. I should start a lost and found. Again, it was a good answer. Quick. Smooth. But she never put the glasses in any drawer or bin. I found them in her glove box the next day. Still there, untouched. Maybe the worst moment of all came from our daughter, Hannah. She was the innocent one in all this. 13, bright-eyed, and still believing her parents were some kind of invincible team. She didn't say much most of the time, but kids pick up on things. They always do. It was a Saturday afternoon when she said it. We were out on the back deck, grilling burgers while Lauren was running errands. Hannah was helping slice tomatoes, chatting about school and a new art project. Then, out of nowhere, she looked up and said, "Mom's been really smiley on the phone lately, like, laughing more than usual. I heard her the other night in the laundry room. She didn't know I was there." I paused mid-slice. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I dunno. It just sounded different, like she was talking to someone she really likes. It didn't sound like one of her girlfriends." I laughed it off in the moment. Told her I was sure it was nothing. But later that night, I couldn't stop hearing those words. Someone she really likes. They ate at me quietly, like rust behind the walls. I told myself I was overthinking. That work stress was making me paranoid. That a few strange coincidences didn't mean anything. I even convinced myself that the sudden change in her clothing, new dresses, tighter fits, shorter hems, was just her evolving sense of style. Women go through phases, I reasoned. They rediscover themselves, reinvent. It doesn't have to mean something sinister, but I felt it, deep down, in my gut. The space between us had grown. Conversations had become lighter, thinner, filled with logistics and plans but never emotion. She stopped asking about my day unless it had something to do with bills or the house. And I stopped sharing, afraid of sounding needy or worse, suspicious. Our Aunt Macy had dulled, too. At first, it was subtle, fewer kisses, fewer late-night touches. Then it turned into scheduling excuses. "I'm too tired. I've got an early showing. I ate too much." Eventually, the space between our bodies in bed started to feel like a physical wall, one I didn't know how to climb. Even Murphy knew. He had stopped sleeping on her side of the bed altogether. That night, lying in the dark with Lauren breathing softly beside me. I knew something had changed. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't just a busy season. It wasn't just marriage fatigue. There was someone else. And as much as I hated the thought, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not grief, but clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. She was hiding something. And now, I needed to know what. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror shaving, barely feeling the razor against my skin. Lauren was already gone. Left early for what she said was a networking brunch with investors. She'd kissed me on the cheek before walking out the door, still wearing that same warm, performative smile she'd been using for weeks. I said, "Love you," out of habit. She didn't say it back. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. I needed the truth. Not guesses. Not gut feelings. Not passive waiting for her to slip up. I needed something solid. Proof. So I stopped hoping and I started watching. I knew a confrontation wouldn't get me anywhere. Lauren was too smooth, too quick with her words. She'd turn it around before I could get a full sentence out. She'd redirect, deflect, flip the narrative. No, I needed facts. Evidence that couldn't be spun or dismissed. I remembered the old laptop I used to work from before I upgraded. It still had a few decent programs on it, including one I'd installed years ago for remote access when I used to travel for work. Back then, I used it to check on files at home. Now I saw a new use. I spent the afternoon setting it up, dusting it off, clearing old clutter, and installing surveillance software. It felt wrong, like I was crossing some invisible boundary. But the sick thing was, it also felt necessary. I wasn't trying to catch her in a lie. I was trying to climb out of one I'd apparently been living in. The camera I chose was a tiny pinhole model meant for security monitoring. I mounted it discreetly in the corner of the home office, just behind a stack of framed awards and certificates on the bookshelf. Lauren never touched them. She barely came into the office unless she was printing something. If anything happened, it would be subtle. It would be planned. And I'd be ready. I tested the feed multiple times, linking it to the laptop which I could control remotely through my phone. I felt like a spy in my own home. But when you're being lied to under your own roof, your moral compass doesn't break. It bends. For 6 days, nothing happened. I monitored everything. I kept things normal on the surface. I went to work. I made dinners. I listened as Lauren told stories about clients who didn't exist and showings that didn't happen. I smiled and nodded like the fool she thought I still was. Then, on the 7th day, it happened. It was a Thursday, same as the night with the wine glasses and the jacket. Fitting somehow. Lauren had left for a closing appointment across town. I was sitting in my truck outside a job site when I got the notification. Motion detected in the office. I tapped into the feed immediately. First, it was just Lauren. She entered the frame wearing a black blouse and a deep Berg *NDY pencil skirt I hadn't seen before. Her makeup was done, heavier than usual. Her hair curled, styled with care. She looked prepared. Then came the knock. She opened the front door, and a man stepped in. Zach Collins. I froze. I'd known Zach for years. We ran in the same circles, built homes in the same zip codes. He owned a rival construction company. A flashy, loud operation that undercut contracts and poached subcontractors like it was a sport. We'd had more than a few unpleasant encounters at local bidding events. I never trusted him professionally. Now, I had a different reason not to trust him at all. On the feed, I watched as Lauren greeted him. Not with a handshake, but with an embrace. Not a quick one either. The kind that says, "We've done this before." Zach smiled as he handed her a bottle of champagne. Veuve Clicquot. She laughed softly, and they walked together toward the office. Lauren closed the door behind them. I sat there in my truck, the dashboard suddenly feeling 1,000 degrees hotter. My breathing got shallow. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. The office door had no camera inside, only the view from the hallway. But I didn't need visuals to know what was happening. The int * Macy in their body language had already told the story. They stayed in there for nearly an hour. When they emerged, Lauren was smoothing her blouse. Zach was grinning like he'd just won a game. They kissed at the door before he left. Soft, casual, practiced. Lauren lingered by the door after he walked out, her fingers lightly touching the glass pane as if she hated to see him go. My stomach turned. It wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate. It was under my roof. In my house. In the office where I had built our business from scratch. Where I spent years developing contracts that paid for the life she now used as cover for her infidelity. And Zach, of all people, this wasn't just about my marriage. It was about my name, my work, my livelihood. It was personal in a way that burned deep. I sat in the truck long after the video ended, my fingers trembling against the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive home right then, walk through the door, and blow the whole thing wide open. But I didn't. I didn't go home at all that night. Instead, I went to a motel 30 miles out, checked in under a name I used for site permits, and sat in silence, watching the clip over and over again until I couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't just one video. That was the first time I caught them, but it wasn't the first time they'd met. You could tell in the way they moved, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just two people deep into a routine, like a couple, not an affair. And suddenly the puzzle snapped into place. Zach had been circling my company for months, bidding lower than he should have been able to, undercutting quotes with knowledge he shouldn't have had. Projects I'd bid on mysteriously falling through. I chalked it up to market competition. But now I knew where he was getting his intel. Lauren, my wife, the person I shared my financial reports with, who saw client names, timelines, architectural drafts. She had access to everything, and she'd been feeding it to my competition while drinking wine in our kitchen and sleeping in my bed. It wasn't just adultery, it was sabotage. That night, alone in a motel bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not shock, not even heartbreak. Something colder, quieter. This wasn't about catching her anymore. That part was done. This was about what came next. And I would not be the one caught off guard again. The next morning, I woke up in the motel to the dull light of a gray sky seeping through cheap curtains. No dreams. Just a strange stillness in my body. Like I'd already processed the damage and moved into some other phase of being. I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. What I felt was precision. Like something inside me had finally clicked into place. This wasn't going to end with a confrontation. Confrontation was reactive. It gave her the power to spin. I'd seen her do it before, how she could pivot from defense to offense with surgical ease. One raised eyebrow, one turn of phrase, and suddenly I'd be explaining myself while she played the victim. Not this time. No more conversations. No more chances to lie. No warning. Only action. I packed up the laptop, made a backup of the footage, and left the motel without breakfast. On the drive back into town, I made 3 calls before I even hit the highway. The first was to a lawyer I'd met years ago at a real estate auction. Her name was Olivia Grant. Quiet, brilliant, known for her discretion and tactical mind. She picked up after 2 rings. "Olivia," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I need to retain you, starting today." "Understood," she replied. "Is this a divorce situation?" "Worse," I said. "It's personal, professional, and I don't want her to see a dime she didn't earn." By noon, I was in her office going over options. I laid everything out, my suspicions, the footage, the pattern of behavior. She didn't flinch. She didn't waste time with sympathy either, which I appreciated. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to prepare. She asked questions, detailed ones, about assets, income, contracts, who owned what. I handed over spreadsheets, deeds, insurance records, even a scanned prenup that was so outdated it was practically useless. She reviewed everything in silence, then leaned back and tapped her pen against her notebook. "Here's what you do," she said. "We set up protective barriers. You'll start moving business contracts into newly formed LLCs. You'll roll personal assets into a trust with an independent trustee. We file nothing yet. This is just preparation. Quiet, clean, and completely legal." I nodded. "And the house?" "You'll place the deed into a domestic asset protection trust. She won't know what hit her until it's done. Once it's in, she can't touch it. Not without a judge's order. Felt good to hear it. Not because I wanted revenge. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about insulation. Lauren had made choices, calculated ones. She'd risked everything we built, handed over pieces of my company to a rival, and done it all with a smile. She thought I'd never see it, that I'd stay too busy or too trusting to notice. She was wrong. By the end of the week, I had restructured over 60% of my company's key assets. Every critical vendor was moved into contracts tied to holding companies Lauren didn't even know existed. Bank accounts were shifted under new management. Revenue lines were obfuscated with coded ledger entries. If she or Zach tried to make a move, financial or legal, they'd be playing a game they didn't understand. The house took a little more work. I created a revocable trust using a third-party attorney Olivia recommended. The property title was transferred, notarized, and refiled in less than 48 hours. Now, even if Lauren checked public records, she'd only see the name of a holding trust she'd never heard before. As far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. But everything had. Meanwhile, I went deeper. The camera in the office was just the start. I installed 2 more, one behind a decorative vent cover in the garage, and another tucked inside the casing of a smoke detector in the living room. Both were motion-activated, both fed straight to a secure cloud account. I even set up alerts tied to Lauren's phone's Wi-Fi signature. When she arrived, I knew. When she left, I knew. I wasn't spying. I was documenting. Zach came back 3 times that week. Once on a Monday afternoon when I was on site. Again Wednesday night while Lauren was supposedly at a staging consultation. The 3rd time? Friday morning. Broad daylight. He didn't even wait to knock. He used a spare key. That one stung. They didn't even have the decency to pretend anymore. On camera, I watched them laugh in the kitchen while Lauren made coffee like it was just another morning. Zach leaned against the island, casually flipping through a client file I recognized. It was one of mine. The Henderson Project, a multi-home development I'd spent months trying to secure. Lauren had access to the blueprints and zoning reports. She'd been in the meetings. She'd printed the contracts. And now she was handing it all to him. My jaw clenched, but I didn't move. I didn't yell. I didn't call. I documented every interaction, every meeting, every minute he spent in my home. By now, I had over 6 hours of footage. Enough to prove adultery. Enough to suggest corporate espionage. And enough, Olivia confirmed, to lock her out of any significant claim to the business or the house. Do not confront her, Olivia had warned. The moment she feels threatened, she'll lawyer up. Let her keep thinking she's winning. So I did. At home, I played the same tired role. Distracted husband, too wrapped up in spreadsheets to notice her smiling at her phone. I nodded through her stories. I kissed her on the cheek when she left the room. And all the while I worked. I drafted letters to clients, letting them know of an impending company rebrand. I informed our CFO, one of the few people I trusted, that we'd be shifting account structures for tax compliance. I booked asset appraisals under a separate LLC, framing them as portfolio audits. Piece by piece, I removed her from the picture. But the moment I knew I had her boxed in, really boxed in, was the night she came home late again and casually asked if we could refinance the mortgage. I nearly laughed. Instead, I leaned against the counter and said, "Why?" She poured herself a glass of wine, red, of course. Rates are dropping. Might be smart to pull out some equity before they climb again. Could give us a little flexibility. I sipped my beer slowly. I'll think about it. She smiled like she always did when she thought she'd won. No rush. That night, while she slept, I watched the camera feed one more time. Zach had been there just 3 days earlier. They'd sat on the couch together. She had curled into him the way she used to with me. Feet tucked, head on his shoulder, hand resting on his chest. And as I watched her now, asleep in my bed, breathing softly like everything was normal, I felt no sympathy. She was planning her future with him while using me to fund it. And she didn't even realize it was already over. It was a Wednesday morning when Lauren told me she'd be heading to Orlando for a 3-day real estate conference. She dropped it into conversation as casually as someone mentioning a dentist appointment. "I'll be flying out Thursday morning," she said, sipping coffee and flipping through her phone. "It's one of those industry mixers, networking, keynote speakers, that sort of thing. Should be back late Sunday." I nodded like I hadn't heard that same excuse before, but I had. Twice. Different cities, same vague itinerary. And every time she returned, there was less of her left in the marriage and more distance in her smile. This time, though, I didn't ask questions. I just said, "Sounds good. Need a ride to the airport?" She smiled, appreciative. "No, I'll Uber. I don't want to mess with your schedule." Of course she didn't. Her schedule was all that mattered. As soon as she walked upstairs to get ready for work, I sent a message to Olivia. One word, green light. That was all it took. We'd planned it down to the hour. Thursday morning, Lauren's Uber pulled away from the driveway at 6:27 a.m. I watched it disappear at the corner of the street, then turned back toward the house. The air was still. Birds chirped. A lawn mower hummed in the distance. And then I got to work. Step 1 was documentation. 2 licensed appraisers, scheduled weeks in advance under a business alias, arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. They moved through the house methodically, photographing every room, every piece of art, furniture, and fixture. Jewelry, watches, electronics, wine collection. Everything was recorded, down to the make and model. This wasn't just inventory. This was legal leverage. While they moved through the house, I contacted the bank and enacted the temporary freeze Olivia had prepared. All joint accounts, checking, savings, the line of credit Lauren used for her real estate expenses, were moved under attorney control pending court review. It didn't close the accounts, but it froze access. Anything she tried to swipe in Orlando declined. At 11 a.m., a locksmith arrived. I didn't bother with explanations. He was one of my guys, contracted through a security firm we used for luxury builds. Within an hour, every lock on the property, doors, garage, shed, even the gate was changed. I kept the originals in a sealed evidence bag. By noon, I stood in the foyer holding a legal envelope addressed to Lauren. Inside, a formal notice of divorce, an itemized separation of assets, and a court-approved temporary restraining order from the property. Olivia had secured it in advance, citing proof of infidelity, emotional manipulation, and business conflict of interest. The box of her personal belongings sat just outside the front door. I'd spent the prior night packing. Her closet, emptied. Shoes, handbags, coats, boxed and labeled. Her vanity, cleared, though I left her travel-sized makeup pouch untouched, the one she always kept in her luggage. A small mercy. Photos of us had been removed from their frames and stored. I left the frames hanging. Let her feel the absence when she returned. At 2 p.m., I set up a discreet camera pointed at the front porch. I wanted to record her reaction when she got back. Not for revenge. For proof. People lie. Footage doesn't. Murphy, our golden retriever, stayed with me. He watched me quietly through the whole process, never barking once. By 5 p.m., the house was quiet again. Clean. Empty. Sterile. I sat at the dining table, alone, for the first time in years and stared at the envelope I'd left beside the door. There was no going back now. Lauren didn't call until the next day. "Hey," she said, voice bubbly. "You won't believe the size of this hotel room. I got upgraded. Giant windows. Jacuzzi tub. Maybe next time you should come with me." I played along. "Maybe I will." We talked for exactly 4 minutes and 13 seconds. She mentioned the pool, the buffet, how great the keynote speaker was. Something about elevating closing strategies. I nodded through every lie. I had already confirmed she wasn't attending any conference. Olivia had cross-checked her name against the attendee list. It wasn't there. But I didn't call her out. I wanted her to feel safe. Right until the end. Sunday night, the Uber pulled up. I watched from the upstairs window, lights off, heart steady. She stepped out in leggings and a denim jacket, hair in a high ponytail, suitcase rolling behind her. She looked relaxed. She didn't look like someone walking into the final act of her old life. When she reached the front door, she paused, looked around, frowned. Her key didn't work. She tried again, and again. That's when she saw the envelope on the porch bench. Then the boxes. She stood there for a long moment, processing. I could see it on her face, the sequence of disbelief, confusion, then realization. She opened the envelope, scanned the letter, flipped to the second page. And that's when she dropped it. It fluttered to the porch floor. She picked it up again and tried to knock. Once, twice. Then she called. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't move. She left a voicemail. Andrew, what is this? What's going on? This can't be legal. You can't just change the locks. Call me, please. She didn't sound angry. She sounded scared. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the one being manipulated. I felt clear. Over the next 48 hours, I received 10 calls, 8 voicemails, 4 texts, 1 long email filled with guilt, denial, and vague admissions like, I know things have been hard, and I never meant to hurt you. No apologies, no accountability, just fear dressed up as regret. I didn't respond. Olivia filed the petition Monday morning. We had a court date secured by the end of the week. With the footage, the financial records, and proof of Zach's involvement, Lauren's options were limited. Olivia was confident we'd retain the house, most business assets, and limit any potential alimony. Her biggest mistake, Olivia said during our final strategy meeting, was thinking you were naive. I nodded. She never saw me coming. That weekend, Hannah came home from her friend's house. I'd kept her out of everything, told her mom was traveling longer than expected. She didn't ask many questions. But when she saw her mom's things gone, she looked at me differently. I sat her down and told her the truth, or at least the clean version. Mom and I are going through something, I said, and it might take some time to figure out. But I need you to know I'm still here.